I can defend him. That's what the 8-year-old girl whispered in the Manhattan courtroom, before turning the entire justice system upside down. The storm outside Manhattan Federal Courthouse had nothing on the storm building inside Courtroom 5B. Rain slashed against the windows, thunder growled above, but within the mahogany-paneled chamber, the silence was sharper than any scream. Every seat was filled. Reporters scribbled furiously. The jury looked numb with fatigue. And at the defense table, Michael Carter, tech prodigy, founder of Lux Tech Solutions, and once called the next Steve Jobs by the Wall Street Journal, sat still, hands clenched, jaw locked. He had been fighting for his freedom for 6 months, fighting alone. His lawyer had quit that morning. The judge had just raised his gavel. The sentence, the one that would destroy him, was moments away from being spoken. That's when it happened. A small voice, steady but piercing, rang out from the back of the room. I can defend him. The words hung in the air, so unexpected, so out of place, that no one reacted at first. Then heads began to turn one by one. The audience twisted in their seats. Jurors blinked. Even the bailiff, a former Marine who'd once guarded international criminals, seemed briefly stunned. Standing in the gallery, just behind a column, was a little girl in a rain-damp hoodie and faded jeans. She looked no older than 8. Her brown curls were tied in a haphazard ponytail with a rubber band that was unraveling. A weathered canvas backpack lay at her feet. Her name, though no one knew it yet, was Nora Blake. The judge, a grizzled man with heavy eyebrows named Harold Whitman, adjusted his glasses. Excuse me? I said, she repeated, stepping into the aisle, I can defend Mr. Carter. Gasps rippled. Somewhere near the prosecution table, someone stifled a laugh. Michael Carter's head snapped up. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. And he hadn't. His face was paler than the paper of the indictment that still sat on the judge's bench. But now, for the first time in weeks, his green eyes sparked with something dangerously close to hope. The prosecutor, Dana Mullins, a career shark in heels, stood. Your Honor, with respect, this is absurd. We can't have a child interrupting federal proceedings. But Judge Whitman held up a hand. He was watching the girl with a strange expression. A man who'd seen 1,000 cases and probably 100 liars, he was not easy to impress. And yet, there was something about the child's voice. It wasn't precocious. It wasn't rehearsed. It was sincere. And who might you be? The judge asked, his tone measured. Nora Blake, she said. I've been attending this trial every day for 3 weeks. I sit in the back row. No one noticed me because I didn't want to be noticed. Why are you here? The judge asked, voice low. Because I believe Mr. Carter is innocent. And because I don't like it when people lie to win. Nora took a deep breath and stepped forward. Her shoes squeaked slightly on the marble floor. My dad used to work for Lux Tech. His name was Robert Blake. He was a paralegal, and one of the honest ones. When he got sick, I promised him I'd keep learning, even if I had to teach myself. So I came here. Why this case? The judge asked again, more softly this time. Because something didn't add up, she said, pulling a small notebook from the front pouch of her hoodie. It was frayed, with bent pages and a black elastic that had long since stretched too far. And because the lawyer who just quit? She pointed to the empty defense chair. He was never trying to win. He was working for her. She turned and pointed, unshaking, at a woman seated 3 rows behind the prosecution. A woman in a navy blazer, pearl earrings, and impossibly perfect posture. Vanessa Sterling, Michael's fiancée. The courtroom seemed to lean forward. The woman in question didn't flinch. She smiled, but her fingers tightened around her clutch bag. "Objection!" Dana Mullins barked. "This is pure theater." "It's not theater," Nora said calmly, still facing the judge. "It's testimony. I've taken notes on every witness. I know when the accountant changed her statement. I know when the video footage was spliced. I know that Mr. Carter's bank records were doctored, and I can show you where." Judge Whitman leaned back. "Miss Blake, are you suggesting a conspiracy to frame the defendant?" "I'm not suggesting," Nora said. "I'm stating, and I believe the same people who hurt my dad are behind it." Michael's hand slowly lowered from his mouth. He looked like he was staring at a ghost. "Your father worked for me?" he whispered. Nora nodded once. "You met him once? 5 years ago. You gave him a holiday bonus. He used it to buy my first backpack." A few people chuckled nervously. Judge Whitman cleared his throat. "Miss Blake, this is highly unorthodox. You are not a licensed attorney, nor are you a guardian of the court. I should have security escort you out." "I understand," Nora said softly, "but I'd still like to submit this." She handed the bailiff her notebook. "Page 32 might be of interest." The judge opened the notebook. His brow furrowed, then rose, then locked. He looked up, slowly, at the girl standing in the aisle. "Everyone out," he said. The courtroom froze. "Your Honor," Dana Mullins began. "Everyone," he repeated. "Out, except Mr. Carter, the child, and my clerk." When the room was finally empty, Judge Whitman folded his hands. "Miss Blake," he said, "do you understand that if what you're claiming is true, you've just accused a federal officer of aiding a fraud scheme? You've implicated a sitting judge, possibly members of the prosecution, and the defendant's own fiancé." "Yes," Nora said. "I also understand that if I'm right, Mr. Carter's life is being stolen from him, and I don't like it when people steal." The judge looked at her long and hard. "All right," he said at last. "Let's see how deep this rabbit hole goes." The air in Judge Whitman's chambers smelled faintly of pine wood and coffee left too long on a burner. He sat behind a heavy oak desk, his gavel set aside, spectacles perched on his nose as he flipped through Nora Blake's notebook with the solemnity of a priest reading scripture. Michael Carter sat to the left of the room, his cuffs undone, hands clasped tightly between his knees. He looked as if he'd aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. Nora stood near the window, her fingers clasped behind her back, the toes of her sneakers tilted inward. But her voice, when she spoke, was steady. "You can start on page 32, Your Honor," she said. "But I'd recommend page 12 if you want context." Judge Whitman didn't respond immediately. His eyes were fixed on the precise handwriting in faded purple ink. Rows of dates, transaction numbers, courtroom observations, and margins filled with tight arrows, timestamps, and shorthand annotations. "Did you really write all this yourself?" he asked finally. Nora nodded. "I come here after school. It's warm, and no one notices me in the back. My dad used to say you could learn more by listening than by talking." "And what did you hear exactly?" he asked. "I heard that Mr. Carter's attorney, Mr. Rollins, never filed the discovery request," she replied, "even though he told the court he did. I heard him tell someone on the phone that the more confused the kid looks, the better. He was talking about Mr. Carter." Michael stiffened in his chair. "I also heard Ms. Sterling, Vanessa, tell him that if he stalled long enough, the rest would take care of itself. That was the day before the prosecution submitted those doctored financial statements?" Whitman looked up slowly. "You believe those statements were doctored?" "I know they were," Nora said. because I checked the routing numbers. The account that supposedly belongs to Mr. Carter? She pulled another crumpled receipt from her hoodie pocket. Same number is written on the back of this. I found it outside the courthouse. It's from Mr. Rollins's lunch order. He wrote it down with the initials VS. Whitman blinked. And you understand what you're implying? That his lawyer is being paid off by his fiancée, who stands to gain financially if Mr. Carter goes to prison, Nora said matter-of-factly. It's not complicated, just disgusting. Michael leaned forward, his voice hoarse. Why would Vanessa do this? Nora looked at him for the first time, truly looked. Her voice softened. She said on the phone, and I wrote it down exactly. Once the idiot is convicted, the engagement clause kicks in. I get full access to his estate. And Frank said the Cayman documents are ready. Judge Whitman's expression turned to stone. Who is Frank? He asked. I don't know, Nora replied. But whoever he is, Vanessa seems to report to him. She said, Uncle Frank will take care of the judge. That's why I knew I had to give this to you directly. In private. The room went completely silent. Michael sat as if turned to marble. Outside, the thunder rolled again, softer now, as if the storm itself was listening. Whitman stood and walked slowly to the window. His shoulders were tense beneath his robe. Nora, I'm going to ask you something I've never asked a child before in all my years on the bench, he said, voice low. Do you know what perjury is? Yes, she said. And do you understand that if any part of what you're saying is false, you could be held responsible for disrupting a federal proceeding? I understand, Nora said, lifting her chin. But if I stayed quiet, and Mr. Carter went to prison because of liars, that would be worse. The judge turned slowly, and for a moment, just a moment, his eyes softened. You remind me of someone I knew a long time ago. She was small, too, but she shook the whole courtroom when she stood up. Nora said nothing. Her fingers curled tightly around the strap of her backpack. Michael finally spoke. Judge, I didn't know about any of this. I didn't even know her father worked for my company. I thought I was just losing everything because I made bad decisions. No, Nora said quietly. You're losing everything because someone decided you were worth more in prison than in the world. That hit harder than any accusation. Judge Whitman let out a breath. All right. Miss Blake, you're coming with me. Nora blinked. Where? To speak with a special agent from the FBI. Michael shot up. Is that necessary? Whitman turned to him. Mr. Carter, if what this young lady is saying is true, your case just transformed from a fraud trial into a full-blown federal conspiracy. He turned back to Nora. Do you think you can tell the agent everything you've told me? Nora nodded. Then grab your notebook. They met Special Agent Marissa Keller in a side office on the 4th floor. She wore a navy suit, silver badge, and an expression that said she had seen too much to be impressed, until Nora began to speak. 15 minutes later, Agent Keller had gone from indifferent to scribbling frantically on a legal pad. You're telling me this kid recorded, in writing, multiple signs of legal sabotage, financial fraud, and premeditated inheritance theft? Yes, Whitman said flatly. And if she's right, your office may want to issue a protective order. Protective order? Michael echoed. For her, Agent Keller said. Nora looked up. Why would I need protection? Keller set her pen down and leaned forward. Because you just became the single most dangerous person to the people running this scam. That night, Michael offered to drive Nora home. She declined. "I stay at the West End Community Center. Miss Jenkins lets me use the bunk beds in the back." Michael stared at her, something breaking behind his eyes. "You live at a shelter?" "I'm not a case," she said, not cruelly, just firmly. "I'm a person who noticed what others missed." He didn't speak for a long time, just nodded, slowly. Outside the courthouse, the city had turned quiet. The rain had passed. Lights from distant taxis blinked through wet pavement. Michael turned to her before she walked away. "Why are you helping me?" he asked, voice barely audible. She stopped, one hand on the door. "My dad believed that truth mattered more than power," she said. "And I believe what they're doing to you isn't just wrong. It's evil." Then, with a small wave, she disappeared into the misting night. Michael Carter hadn't been back to his penthouse in over a month. The glass tower on West 57th Street, the same one that had once graced the cover of Architectural Digest, now felt hollow, like an empty museum of a life that no longer belonged to him. Lights flickered on with motion sensors as he stepped inside, but they offered no warmth, only silence. The city sparkled outside the wraparound windows, cold and indifferent. He stood there for a moment, listening to the faint hum of the air purifier and the echo of his own footsteps. Then he walked straight to the study. It was exactly how he had left it the morning before the arraignment. His desk cluttered with unopened mail, a half-full mug of coffee fossilized on a coaster, and the blue leather briefcase that had held all the legal documents Vanessa had once insisted he sign for your own good. Michael opened it slowly. Inside were two folders, one labeled Engagement Agreement, and the other, curiously, marked only with a sticker that read, Private, Do Not Copy. He opened the first folder and began to read. The agreement, drafted by Sterling & Bell LLP, Vanessa's family's firm, was neatly worded, sanitized, and, he realized now, lethal in its implications. Page 12 included a clause that froze his personal assets in the event of felony charges and transferred temporary power of attorney to his fiancée. His breath caught. It was elegantly buried beneath pages of vague phrasing, but the intention was clear. If Michael was ever convicted or incapacitated, Vanessa Sterling could legally act on his behalf and inherit his controlling shares in Luxtech. He remembered signing the addendum at the hospital after a panic attack, drugged on Ativan, half-conscious, with Vanessa's voice in his ear. "It's just to cover you, babe. You need to focus on healing, not lawyers." He had signed it. He remembered her smile, and now he was standing here, trembling. She had never loved him. Not the real him. Only what she could take. He closed the folder and slowly sank into the leather chair behind his desk. His fingers pressed against his temples as a low groan escaped his throat. Grief had no volume. Sometimes it whispered like a betrayal in the dark. Sometimes it screamed. Meanwhile, across the city, Nora Blake was scribbling by flashlight in the back corner of the West End Community Center. The community center's multi-purpose room doubled as her bedroom after lights out. 2 plastic bins held all her clothes and possessions. Her mattress was a folded gym mat beneath a pile of library books and donated blankets. She wasn't afraid of being alone. She was used to it. But tonight she couldn't stop thinking about Michael. People thought millionaires couldn't be victims, but Nora had seen it. The pain in his eyes, the way his hands shook when he realized the people closest to him had orchestrated his fall. She knew that kind of pain. She lived it every night her mother didn't call, every morning when she looked at the empty bunk next to her and remembered what it was like to have breakfast as a family. She flipped to a fresh page in her notebook and began copying down what she remembered from Vanessa's phone call. Once the idiot's convicted, I get access to the LuxTech voting shares. Uncle Frank said the Cayman docs are clean. Engagement clause covers mental health, not just criminal. Get him to sign the DNR addendum next week. Nora paused. DNR? Her stomach clenched. She'd heard that acronym before. Do not resuscitate. Had Vanessa really been planning to? She closed the notebook slowly, hugging it to her chest. For the first time since the trial began, a tremor ran through her. This wasn't just a financial scam. It was an attempt to erase someone's future entirely. And Michael had no idea how close he'd come to disappearing from his own life. At dawn, Michael returned to the courthouse and requested a private meeting with Detective Rachel Chen, the financial crimes officer working alongside Agent Keller. She met him in a conference room, still wearing the same gray blazer from the night before. Her dark hair was tied in a loose braid, and a large coffee sat on the table, untouched. I assume this is about the engagement contract, she said before he even sat down. He handed her the folder. Read page 12. She skimmed it, her expression darkening. She embedded a conditional transfer clause. Clever. I want to file charges, he said. Fraud. Coercion. Something. Chen shook her head slowly. We can't do that yet. Not until we prove she orchestrated the criminal setup. Otherwise, it's just a civil dispute between two consenting adults. I was drugged, Michael said bitterly. Do you have proof? Michael's lips tightened. No, he admitted, but I'm willing to find it. That evening, Michael returned to the hospital to visit his father. William Carter Sr., once the razor-sharp chairman of LuxTech's board, lay unconscious in room 914 of Mount Sinai West. Ever since his stroke, his mental clarity had flickered like a faulty signal, sometimes lucid, sometimes lost. Michael sat beside him, the legal folder resting on his lap. I'm sorry, Dad, he whispered. I didn't see what she was doing. I should have been smarter, stronger. The old man didn't stir. Michael reached into the folder and pulled out the final document, the one Vanessa had labeled private. He unfolded it slowly. It was a revocable living trust, newly updated, signed by his father's trembling hand, transferring oversight of the company to Vanessa Sterling in the event of Michael Carter's incapacitation, legal compromise, or personal misconduct. His vision blurred. Dad, he whispered, why did you sign this? The only answer was the steady beep of the heart monitor, but then Michael noticed something. A sticky note stuck beneath the last page, written in unsteady, looping handwriting. Not my words. She said it was a therapy doc. Don't trust her. Protect the company. Michael's hands began to shake. His father hadn't meant to sign it. He'd been manipulated, too. They were both pawns. The next morning, Michael arrived at the courthouse early, wearing the same suit he'd worn when Forbes named him Innovator of the Year. But he wasn't there for publicity. He was there for war. He spotted Nora sitting on the steps outside, legs crossed, her backpack beside her. She looked up when he approached. You didn't sleep much either, she said. No, Michael replied, but I figured something out. She tilted her head. What? He held up the engagement contract. I know how she did it. Nora's eyes narrowed. Let me guess, signed under sedation? He nodded. She used my father's condition and my own mental health history to gain power of attorney and hide a trail of transfers. And I let her, because I thought love meant trust. Love doesn't mean letting people lie to you, Nora said quietly. It means telling the truth, even when it hurts. Michael stared at her. You're 8, right? She nodded. You talk like someone who's lost more than any child should. Nora didn't reply. Instead, she stood, brushed off her pants, and said, Then let's go win. The corridors of the courthouse had their own kind of silence. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that feels like a breath held too long, like a truth hiding behind wood-paneled doors and sealed files. Nora Blake had grown used to that silence. It was the background music of every system she had learned to navigate since her dad died. Hospitals, shelters, courtrooms, places where adults whispered things they didn't want children to hear. She had also learned how to listen through walls. It was nearly 5:00 p.m. when she returned to the courthouse to retrieve the notebook she'd accidentally left in conference room C. She walked alone down the side hallway, past the clerk's office, past the elevators, to the west wing where high-profile meetings were usually held. That's when she heard it. A voice. Low. Measured. A woman's voice. At first, she thought someone had left a radio on behind the frosted glass of room 4D. But then a second voice joined. Deeper, male, urgent. She crept closer. The door was closed but slightly warped at the bottom, letting just enough sound escape. She crouched and leaned in. No longer viable. He's waking up more often now. That was the man. Then the woman replied, Cool, deliberate. Then move up the timeline. Carter's father dies within the week, and we lock down the trust. I want that voting control before the board reconvenes. Nora froze. William Carter. They were talking about Michael's father, about killing him. You're sure the sedatives are still working? The man asked. There was a pause. Dr. Landon adjusted the dosage this morning, but he's asking too many questions. If he talks to anyone, the DNR gets challenged and the whole arrangement collapses. It's too risky. Should I? The man's voice trailed off. Wait for my call, the woman said. If he makes it to Friday, we pull the plug. Quietly. Then we leak a grief spiral story to the press. It'll bury the hearing. Nora's heart slammed against her chest. The woman's voice was unmistakable. Vanessa Sterling. And the man? Nora couldn't see his face, but the voice was familiar. She had heard it before, laughing near the clerk's desk. Possibly a court officer, maybe more. Nora took 2 silent steps back. She needed to run. 5 minutes later, she burst through the side entrance of the courthouse and into the gray Manhattan evening, heart still pounding. Her first instinct was to go to Michael, but something told her that if she did, if she wasn't careful, she could put him in more danger. They were watching him. They were controlling the narrative, the records, even the medical staff. She needed someone outside the system. She opened her flip phone. It was old, government-issued, with a cracked screen. But it worked. She scrolled to the only person she trusted in city government, Sarah Whitman, daughter of Judge Harold Whitman, and a former caseworker who had helped Nora once, long ago, after her father died. Sarah picked up on the second ring. Nora? They're going to kill him, Nora said, breathless. William Carter. They're going to shut off his machines and make it look natural. I heard it myself. A pause. Where are you? Outside the courthouse. South exit. Stay there, Sarah said. I'm coming now. Meanwhile, in a corner office 15 floors above Central Park West, Vanessa Sterling ended the call and calmly dropped her phone into the shredder. Behind her, the lights of the city pulsed against the glass. She didn't smile. She didn't sigh. She simply turned to the man seated across from her. Franklin DeWitt, a former investment banker turned shadow lobbyist, and said, "We have less than 72 hours to make this permanent." DeWitt leaned back, fingers steepled. The girl. What about her? She's a wild card. Vanessa poured herself a glass of scotch. She's a child. Children don't win. DeWitt frowned. This one listens, watches, remembers. That's a problem. Vanessa swirled the drink. Then solve it. By the time Sarah Whitman reached Nora, the girl's hands were still trembling. They sat together on a concrete bench beneath the traffic lights, the city roaring around them in oblivious indifference. You heard all of it? Sarah asked. Nora nodded. Every word. You're sure it was Vanessa? Yes. She said his name. She said they'll pull the plug on Friday. Sarah's hands went rigid around the thermos she'd brought. That's 2 days from now. They're going to call it natural, Nora whispered. But they're using sedatives. They've already forged the DNR paperwork. Sarah didn't ask how she knew. She had learned long ago that Nora's instincts weren't guesses. They were patterns. Studied, remembered, calculated. Okay, Sarah said, standing. Then we beat them to it. Nora looked up. We go to Agent Keller. We file an emergency motion for medical injunction and hospital surveillance, and we do it tonight. That same night, Michael was in room 914 again, sitting beside his father's hospital bed. The old man's face looked peaceful, but Michael now noticed how thin the IV lines had become, how sluggish the monitors sounded. Something was wrong. He could feel it. A nurse walked in. A new one. He hadn't seen her before. Mid-30s, blonde, overly cheerful. She smiled too much. I'm just here to adjust the meds, she said, already typing into the machine. Michael frowned. Where's Angela? She's off duty. I'm covering the night shift. Michael's instincts flared. What's in that syringe? He asked. She hesitated. Just enough. Saline and lorazepam. He stood. May I see the dosage? I'm sorry, sir, but I'm his medical proxy now. Show me. The nurse's eyes flicked toward the door. Then she smiled too tightly. Of course. She handed him the vial. It was not lorazepam. Michael's chest tightened. He grabbed the call button and slammed it. Security to 914 now! The nurse lunged, but the door flew open and Agent Keller stepped in, badge raised. Step away from the machine. Hands up! The nurse froze. Behind her, Sarah Whitman entered with Nora, her eyes wide. They were going to do it tonight, Nora said breathlessly. She moved up the timeline. Michael stared at them, the girl who had risked everything, and the woman who still believed the truth mattered. His knees nearly gave out, but he didn't cry. He stepped between his father and the nurse, eyes locked on the vial in his hand. Not tonight, he said. Not ever. Manhattan, 7:26 a.m. The sky above Columbia University was bruised purple, heavy with summer rain. Students trickled into the Butler Library for what they thought would be a quiet morning lecture on ethics and emerging tech, headlined by Nun Cakhun, Vanessa Sterling. It was supposed to be a PR coup, a showcase of Vanessa's brilliance and philanthropy following the company scandal, carefully choreographed to frame her as the composed, forward-thinking leader LuxTech needed. The cameras were in place. The stage was lit. The dean stood ready with his introduction. But in the far back of the crowd, wearing a faded hoodie and sitting behind a pillar, Nora Blake was watching. Her heart pounded behind her ribcage, not out of fear, but precision. Next to her, Michael Carter adjusted the small audio device in his jacket pocket. The recording, the one Nora had captured 2 nights ago outside the courthouse, was clear, damning, and time-stamped. It wasn't enough for a court yet, but it was more than enough to fracture Vanessa's public image. All they needed was timing. Earlier that morning, the plan had been simple. Nora would attend the lecture unnoticed. Michael, still officially under federal investigation and barred from media contact, would remain out of sight until Vanessa was mid-speech. At the peak moment, when she claimed full moral and corporate authority, the recording would play. A flash drive had been loaded with the clip and pre-inserted into the media laptop connected to the hall's speaker system. But what they hadn't counted on was someone else knowing. At 7:41 a.m., 15 minutes before Vanessa was due on stage, Nora slipped out from the audience to the AV booth on the 2nd floor to double-check the setup. That's when she saw him. A man in a security uniform, but not Columbia's usual detail. She recognized his voice instantly. The man from the courthouse, the same one who had whispered about moving up the timeline. He was leaning over the control panel, yanking out the flash drive. Nora didn't think. She ran. "Hey!" the man barked, spinning toward her. She bolted for the stairwell. The hallway outside was narrow and echoing, her sneakers slipping against the polished floor. She yanked open the red metal stairwell door and flew down the steps. 2 at a time, breath sharp, heart like a drumline in her ears. The man followed fast. He was older, taller, stronger. But he underestimated one thing. Nora had lived her whole life in buildings like this. Group homes, shelters, foster centers. She knew every inch of every fire escape, every twist of back stairs. She could map an exit in her head in 3 seconds flat. 2nd floor. She ducked into a corner, yanked open the janitor's closet door, and slammed it shut behind her. Footsteps thundered past. She counted. 1, 2, 3. Then opened the door and sprinted the opposite direction. Up, not down. By the time she reached the 5th floor catwalk, she was panting hard, but she could see the media booth ahead, empty now, the flash drive still lying beside the laptop. She lunged forward, grabbed it, and reinserted it, locking it into place just as the room's AV system reset. Below, on stage, Vanessa's voice echoed across the lecture hall. "And as a woman in leadership, it is my honor to continue the legacy of integrity that this company stands for." Nora ducked back into the shadows. Then, from her backpack, she pulled out a second device, a trigger remote, designed from a $9 Amazon fob and rewired using parts from a toy drone. She clicked it, and the room exploded with sound. "Once the idiot's convicted, I get access to the Lux Tech voting shares. Uncle Frank said the Cayman docs are clean. Get him to sign the DNR addendum next week. If he talks, we pull the plug." Quietly. The audio was scratchy, but unmistakable. Vanessa froze mid-sentence. The crowd gasped. Someone screamed. Cameras clicked wildly. The Dean of Columbia stared at Vanessa like she'd grown horns. "Cut the feed!" she snapped to a stagehand. Too late. Michael Carter was already walking down the center aisle, slow and steady, like a soldier returning to battle. His face was pale, but his voice rang clear. You want to talk about ethics, Vanessa? Let's talk about fraud, about coercion, about attempted murder. Vanessa's mouth opened, but she said nothing. The man from the stairwell burst into the side of the hall just then, face flushed, eyes wild, and security swarmed him before he could speak. Agent Keller wasn't far behind. He stepped forward, lifted his badge, and said, "We have enough. Vanessa Sterling, you are under investigation for conspiracy, abuse of power of attorney, and attempted manslaughter. You'll come with us." The silence that followed was deafening. Vanessa's carefully curated world had collapsed, on live camera, at her own event, and the girl responsible stood unseen above them all, peeking over the balcony, heart racing not with fear, but with justice. Outside, the morning drizzle had turned to rain. Nora found Michael waiting by the edge of the quad. His hands were shaking. He looked at her. "You chased him, didn't you?" She grinned. "Only 4 flights of stairs." "You're not just smart, you're terrifying." She shrugged. "I'm 8. It's a superpower." He let out a breath, half laughter, half relief. "What happens now?" she asked. Michael looked toward the dark clouds moving east over the skyline. "We clean up the mess, file formal charges, testify. And after that," he looked down at her, "maybe we figure out what a real family looks like." Nora didn't reply. She just slipped her hand into his quietly. No contracts, no lawyers, no recordings, just trust. And for the first time in a long time, both of them felt safe. It started with coffee. The storm had passed. Manhattan was sunlit again, as if the city had no memory of the chaos that erupted in Lecture Hall B the morning before. But Michael Carter remembered. So did Nora. They sat at a small cafe just off Riverside Drive, the kind of quiet, ivy-covered spot where no one would look for a fallen millionaire and a girl with a mind like a chess grandmaster. The air smelled of cinnamon and roasted beans. But peace was a luxury neither of them could afford anymore. Michael stirred his drink, eyes locked on the laptop screen. Nora sat across from him, legs dangling off the bench, watching him type. "They'll try to spin it," Michael muttered. "Damage control, crisis PR, maybe even plant a counter-narrative that I staged the whole thing." Nora nodded. "Vanessa still has people on the inside." Michael looked at her, pausing. "There's someone else, too. Someone bigger. She's not smart enough to have pulled all this off alone." "And not bold enough," Nora added. That's when he arrived. A tall man in a tailored gray suit with silver-streaked hair and an easy smile that could disarm even the most skeptical investor. He approached like someone who belonged everywhere, yet promised you his time like you were the only one who mattered. Franklin Rhodes. Michael stood. "Frank." "Mike," the older man said warmly, clasping his hand. "You've been through hell, kid." Franklin turned to Nora. "And you must be the little attorney I've heard about." Nora raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Franklin chuckled. "Sharp eyes. You'll do well." He took the seat beside Michael. For years, Franklin had been more than just Michael's father's business partner. He'd been like an uncle, a second mentor after William Carter's health began to decline. He'd advised Michael on mergers, moderated boardroom blow-ups, and sent birthday gifts Nora could only dream of. To Michael, he'd always been trustworthy. Until now. Franklin leaned in, voice lowered. "I saw the clip, Mike. What she said. If it's real, then Vanessa's finished. But you need to tread carefully. She'll burn the company down before she lets you take control." "I'm not after control," Michael said. "I want the truth out. I want my father safe, and I want these people in prison. Franklin nodded, slow and heavy. Of course. But you have to understand, Shay, the board's nervous. Stocks are shaking. Investigations make markets bleed. There are ways to handle this quietly. Michael stiffened. Quiet doesn't fix corruption. Franklin sighed, like a weary teacher with a stubborn pupil. You've always had your father's heart. But this isn't about heart, Michael. It's about containment. It was the way he said that word. Smooth, measured, like a man who'd rehearsed that line before. Nora reached into her pocket and pressed record. "10 minutes later, Franklin was gone, leaving behind a promise to handle things from the inside. Michael stared at his empty coffee cup, something gnawing in his chest. Nora watched him. He lied, she said flatly. Michael looked up. That story about the board, it was a test. You told me to mention the Cayman account in front of him if he tried to contain anything. Michael nodded slowly. And? Nora slid her phone across the table. She had recorded the whole thing. Franklin's slight hesitation when she mentioned Cayman account. The flicker of a smirk. The subtle shift in tone, like a man proud that his plan was too elegant to trace. I've heard that voice before, Nora said. Not just at your father's hospital, not just in board meetings. She opened another audio file, the original whisper she'd caught outside the courthouse, and there it was, Franklin Rhodes. You're sure? Michael asked, though he already knew. I never forget a voice, Nora said, and I never forget a liar. That night, Michael returned to his penthouse apartment for the first time in weeks. It still smelled like stale paper and glass cleaner. The security system had been reset by someone else. As he stepped inside, he noticed the smallest detail. The glass paperweight on his father's desk had been moved half an inch to the left. A message. Franklin had been here. He checked the safe. Empty. The Cayman account ledger, the hard copy with the old trust beneficiary signatures, was gone. Michael leaned against the wall, breath shallow. The pieces were falling into place. But the cost of every move was growing heavier. He was up against not one enemy, but two faces of the same monster. Vanessa, the ruthless executor. Franklin, the architect behind the curtain. Meanwhile, across town, Nora sat curled on a borrowed couch at Sarah Whitman's apartment, reviewing audio logs and legal precedents while Agent Keller made her grilled cheese. She looked up suddenly. We need the power of attorney transfer. Keller paused. What do you mean? The document that gave Vanessa legal control over William Carter's medical decisions. If Franklin forged it, we'll find inconsistencies in the notary logs. Location, timestamp, witness signatures, all of it. Sarah nodded. That would be enough for a federal inquiry. But we'll need proof, Nora said. And Michael can't get it. He's too exposed now. Keller sighed. Then we'll have to find someone who isn't. Nora's eyes lit up. I know who. Chegg. The next morning, at exactly 8:02 a.m., a janitor at the 39th floor legal records office in Midtown dropped a stack of old files by the shredder, and within seconds, the documents had vanished. They weren't shredded. They were in the backpack of an 8-year-old girl named Nora Blake, disguised as a courier intern, badge forged from laminated sticker paper and Google fonts. Inside those files was everything they needed. Franklin Rhodes' signature, copied onto a document notarized 2 minutes before he was in a live Zoom conference with investors in London. A logistical impossibility, a provable forgery, and a ticking bomb. That evening, Michael stood at his father's bedside again. The machine still beeped steadily, but William Carter remained unresponsive. Michael took his father's hand. "I know who did this now," he whispered. "It wasn't just Vanessa. It was Franklin. He's the one who moved your shares. He's the one who wanted you gone." No response, but Michael swore the grip tightened, just slightly. Behind him, Nora entered quietly. "We have enough to file," she said, "and Sarah's already prepping the motion." Michael exhaled. "They tried to split us up," he murmured. "Tried to make us doubt everyone." Nora looked up at him. "But they forgot one thing." "What?" "I never lose at chess. There is a kind of silence that only exists in hospitals, the kind that comes just before the alarm. Michael Carter knew that silence too well. It clung to the halls of Mount Sinai Hospital like invisible smoke. For the first time in weeks, things had started to feel possible again. Franklin Rhodes had been exposed, the forged document uncovered. A new team of federal investigators was now poring over every transfer of power of attorney between William Carter and the board of Luxtech. But justice, it seemed, could not wait in peace. That morning, Michael had arrived early to check in on his father, hoping to tell him, even if only in whispers, that the worst was nearly over. He found William Carter unconscious, as always, but something felt different. His skin was pale, his breaths too shallow. Then came the sound. The intercom crackled, harsh and urgent. "Code Blue, room 6114, cardiac arrest. Repeat, code blue." Michael froze. Room 614 was his father's. He didn't remember dropping the coffee or racing down the hall. He only remembered the sound of his own heart, deafening, relentless. When he reached the glass door, 2 nurses were already in motion. A crash cart wheeled in behind them. The monitor above his father's bed was flatlining. Michael slammed his palm against the window. "Open the door! That's my father!" A nurse turned, face grave. "You need to step back, sir. We're trying to stabilize him." Inside, chest compressions had begun. 1, 2, 3. No movement. Nora appeared beside him, barefoot, wrapped in a hospital blanket. She looked up at him with wide eyes. Michael's voice cracked. "He wasn't like this last night. He was stable. We were so close." "Michael," Nora said softly, "he's still here. Fight for him." But he couldn't move, couldn't speak. Then something inside him snapped. He pushed past the nurses, ignoring the protests, and stood at his father's bedside, fingers trembling, voice shaking. "Dad, listen to me. I know you're in there. You held on this long. You don't get to leave now. You taught me to fight when everything falls apart. Well, I'm fighting, and I need you to do the same." A long beep pierced the air. Then, a flicker. The line on the monitor jumped once, then again, and again. "He's responding!" one of the nurses shouted. "Sinus rhythm returning!" A wave of relief crashed over Michael, but he remained frozen, hand still on his father's. The attending physician stepped in, face stunned. "We're stabilizing him. That was, unexpected." Michael looked at the monitor, still unsure if what he saw was real. Nora touched his arm. "He heard you." He turned to her, eyes full of tears. "I didn't even know if I believed that anymore." "You didn't need to believe," she said. "You just needed to show up." 2 hours later, the hospital was calm again. William Carter was stabilized, breathing on his own, though still unconscious. But the change was unmistakable. His heart was strong. The damage had not worsened. For the first time in weeks, the doctors used the word hope. Michael stood outside the ICU with Agent Keller and Sarah Whitman. "Someone triggered that cardiac episode," Keller said grimly. "We found signs of a mild potassium spike in his IV. Not fatal, but enough to destabilize an already vulnerable heart." Michael's jaw clenched. "Franklin?" Keller nodded. "He had access through a third-party contractor. We're tracing it now." Sarah added, "And there's more. The preliminary review of the trust documents reveals something else." She handed Michael a file. "It's about Nora." Inside the folder was a sealed amendment to William Carter's living trust, signed 6 months ago. It named Michael Carter as the primary beneficiary and corporate successor, but it also included a custody clause, one Michael had never seen. "In the event of my death or incapacitation," it read, "I request legal guardianship of Nora Blake be transferred to my son, Michael Carter, under the condition that she consents." Michael stared at the page. "This can't be real." Sarah met his eyes. "It is. Your father met her at one of the Lux Tech outreach programs. She was only 6 then. He kept contact through school counselors. He was preparing to bring her into your family. Quietly." Michael looked through the glass door at the ICU where his father lay, still and silent, but more alive than ever before. "You mean he wanted her to be my family even before all this?" Sarah nodded. Keller added, "He saw what you didn't, that you both needed each other." Michael found Nora in the hospital garden an hour later. She was sitting on the edge of a stone bench, drawing circles in the dirt with a stick. He sat beside her. "Hey," he said gently. She didn't look up. "He almost died." "I know," he whispered. "But he didn't." A long pause. "I was so scared, Michael. Not just for him. For you. I thought I was going to lose everything again." Michael swallowed hard. "I found something in Dad's trust file," he said. "Something about you." Her eyes finally lifted. "He wanted me to take care of you, Nora. Not just because of what you've done, but because he saw you. He saw what I was too blind to recognize." She blinked. "What's that?" "That you're not just brilliant. You're mine to fight for." Tim. There was no dramatics music. No swelling orchestral score. Just a child breathing in shaky relief and a man rediscovering what it meant to be a son, and maybe, just maybe, a father. Michael held out the document. "You don't have to decide now. But when you're ready, I'd be honored." Nora didn't speak. She simply leaned her head against his shoulder. And for the first time in her young life, she let someone hold her weight, not because she was weak, but because she no longer had to be strong alone. The room smelled of cedarwood and ink. It was the private study of William Carter, untouched since his hospitalization. Nestled on the top floor of the Carter family estate just outside Tarrytown, New York, the study overlooked the Hudson River, a view his father had always loved. Michael stood in silence, running his fingers across the shelves lined with law journals and engineering blueprints. Nora sat at his desk, her feet dangling off the leather chair, turning a brass compass in her hand. "I've never been here," she said. Michael nodded. "My father was a quiet man, But this is where he built his world. Nora looked around. Where he built his legacy. That word lingered in the air like dust in the sunlight. Legacy. Not stock options, not real estate, something else entirely. Sarah Whitman arrived 15 minutes later, holding a small, worn wooden box with William's initials carved in the corner. "It was delivered to my office by a courier," she said. "No return label. Only a note that said, 'In case of my silence, open with Michael and the girl.'" Michael's breath caught. Inside the box was a flash drive. Encrypted. He plugged it into the old desktop computer still humming in the corner. The screen flickered. Then a video began to play. William Carter appeared, seated in this very room. He looked thinner than Michael remembered, but his voice was steady. There were soft shadows under his eyes, the kind a man gathers after years of carrying other people's burdens. "Michael," his voice said, "and Nora, if you're watching this, it means I didn't get to tell you everything I wanted. So I'll say it now, not as a CEO or a lawyer or even a father, but as a man who has failed and learned. Michael, my son, I raised you to believe power is earned, but what I forgot to teach you is that love must be chosen. You were always brilliant, but too afraid to trust. I see that now. And I see you trying. Nora, you remind me of someone I once loved deeply. A little girl I met on the street in Queens in the late 70s. She gave me half a sandwich and told me to share it with the world. I never saw her again, but I've spent decades trying." Michael glanced at Nora. Her eyes were fixed on the screen, unmoving. "When I met you at that outreach event, I saw the same spark, the same fire, the same hunger not for money, but for justice. And I knew you didn't need another program. You needed a home. I made mistakes, both of you. I trusted the wrong people. I handed Franklin Rhodes more control than I should have, and I let Vanessa's ambition slip under my radar. But I've documented everything. Inside this box, beneath the panel, you'll find one last file, the paper trail that can bring them down. Use it, together. And remember, legacy isn't what we leave behind in banks. It's what we build into people. And you too. You are the very best of me." The screen went black. There was a long silence. Nora stood slowly, then opened the bottom of the box. Beneath a velvet lining, a hidden drawer clicked open, revealing a manila folder. Inside, signed internal memos, a timeline of asset transfers, email screenshots, and most importantly, a sworn affidavit William had filed weeks before his stroke, naming Franklin Rhodes as an unregistered fiduciary threat. Michael's hands trembled as he flipped through the documents. "This is it," he whispered. "This is everything." But Nora's mind was somewhere else. "He called me family," she said quietly. "He wanted me, even before you did." Michael knelt beside her. "He saw what I didn't, Nora. I thought I had to protect you, but you've been protecting me this whole time." That night, Michael called an emergency meeting with Sarah, Agent Keller, and a federal judge. A new legal motion was filed to freeze Franklin's assets. A federal injunction was placed on Vanessa's remaining shares. But none of it stopped what came the next morning. A public statement from Franklin Rhodes himself aired on all major networks. The recent accusations made by Michael Carter and a minor child, manipulated into a high-profile media stunt, are not only false, but dangerous. I mourn the decline of William Carter, but I will not let his legacy be hijacked by conspiracy. Effective immediately, I am assuming full fiduciary control of LuxTech Holdings until the court deems otherwise. Michael watched the footage in stunned silence. Franklin wasn't running. He was doubling down. Back in the study, Nora was reviewing every line of William's final affidavit. She tapped a section near the bottom. "This clause here," she said, "it mentions the Argus Protocol." Michael frowned. That was a code name for Dad's old ethics algorithm. He used it to vet internal risk, kind of like a moral compass AI. He updated it 3 months before his stroke, Nora said. And he named 2 guardians for its data lockout. She turned the page. There it was. Primary guardian, Nora Blake. Secondary guardian, Michael Carter. Michael blinked. "He gave you the key?" Nora smiled faintly. "I guess he believed I knew right from wrong." Later that evening, they sat again in the study, light fading over the Hudson, reviewing the full contents of William's encrypted archive. A digital legacy, locked by code and memory, now open to them both. What they found would change the company forever, but deeper still, it changed something inside them. Nora wasn't just the girl Michael had failed to see. She was the heart of everything William had fought for. His legacy, not in spreadsheets, but in spirit. And Michael wasn't just the heir. He was the bridge between a dying father's quiet truth and a child's brilliant courage. As the sun dipped behind the trees, Michael whispered aloud what had been buried in him too long. "You're not just my responsibility, Nora. You're my reason to keep going." Nora didn't reply. She just leaned her head against his side. 2 lost people, finally belonging to something real. New York Federal Courthouse, Tuesday, 8:58 a.m. The air was thin, like the calm before a hurricane. Michael Carter adjusted his tie with hands that had drafted hundreds of contracts, but never once trembled like this. Beside him sat Nora Blake, hair in a neat braid, wearing a navy blue dress Sarah had helped her pick out that morning. She held a manila folder in her lap and refused to let go. Across the aisle, Franklin Rhodes and his legal team. 5 lawyers in charcoal suits with dead eyes and sharper tongues. At the center, Vanessa Dorn, unrepentant, composed, and colder than glass. At exactly 9 o'clock a.m., Judge Lenora Graves entered. Court was in session. The case on the docket. The People versus Franklin Rhodes, Vanessa Dorn, alleging conspiracy to commit corporate fraud, obstruction of fiduciary duty, and attempted medical malpractice. But this session, this motion hearing, was about something far more personal. It was about Nora. 2 nights before, Franklin had filed a surprise emergency motion, claiming that Nora Blake, being a minor involved in ongoing legal proceedings and now in possession of proprietary corporate data, was in unsuitable custodial care under Michael Carter. His lawyers cited emotional instability, legal entanglements, and potential witness tampering. They asked the court to assign Franklin himself as temporary guardian to safeguard the child and the company's interests. It was a calculated move. A warning. A threat. Michael leaned toward Sarah. "This is a trap." She whispered back. "Then we beat him at his own game." Judge Graves adjusted her glasses. "I've reviewed the preliminary filings. The matter before the court is the custodial status of minor Nora Blake, aged 8. Given the extraordinary circumstances, and the minor's central role in whistleblower activities, I will hear both sides. Franklin's lead attorney stood, his tone oily with faux concern. Your Honor, we have great sympathy for Miss Blake, but sympathy cannot cloud responsibility. She is currently living in an emotionally volatile environment with a man under investigation, carrying digital keys to sensitive corporate data, and giving interviews to federal agents without a licensed advocate present. He turned toward Nora. She deserves protection, stability, structure. Nora didn't blink. Then Sarah Whitman rose. In fact, Your Honor, what Miss Blake deserves is what Mr. Rhodes and Ms. Dorn have tried desperately to prevent. A voice. The judge tilted her head. Are you suggesting the child speak? Sarah nodded. She's not a pawn. She's the witness. The one they underestimated. A long pause. Judge Graves turned to Nora. Miss Blake, are you willing to speak for yourself? Nora stood, calm, controlled, like a queen on a chessboard. Yes, Your Honor. They brought a stool so she could reach the microphone. Nora didn't fidget. She didn't stammer. She looked at Franklin Rhodes and Vanessa Dorn, then turned her gaze to the judge. My name is Nora Blake. I live with Michael Carter, and I want to keep it that way. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. She pulled a document from her folder, a copy of William Carter's handwritten affidavit, naming Michael her legal guardian by request. My mother was a paralegal, Nora said. She taught me about consent, about legal rights, and about truth. Michael Carter never asked to be my guardian. My father didn't either, but he chose me anyway. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. I helped stop fraud. I helped stop a hospital murder, and these people, she pointed to Franklin and Vanessa, called me unstable. But I know what unstable looks like. It looks like a man forging documents to steal a company. It looks like a woman who tried to unplug someone's father to take control of a boardroom. The judge held up her hand. Miss Blake, that's quite a claim. I can prove it. Nora reached for a second folder and handed it to Sarah, who submitted it to the court. Inside, the full audio recording of Franklin's conversation about containment, the video of Vanessa's private medical threats, and the decrypted timeline William Carter had prepared. Evidence. All admissible. The judge studied the document silently. Then she asked a final question. Nora, do you believe Michael Carter is capable of protecting you? Nora looked straight at her. No, I don't believe it. Michael's chest caved. Nora added, I know it. The courtroom fell still. Judge Graves sat back, thinking. For a moment, it seemed the entire room had stopped breathing. Then she spoke. This court finds no grounds to remove Nora Blake from Michael Carter's guardianship. Further, given the submitted evidence, I am placing a temporary restraining order on Franklin Rhodes and Vanessa Dorn from contacting or representing Miss Blake in any form, pending federal investigation. Bang. Gavel dropped. Case adjourned. Franklin stood, visibly stunned. Vanessa hissed something under her breath and stormed out. Michael looked at Nora, but she was already walking toward him, and then, in front of the whole courtroom, she hugged him, tight, not because she was scared, but because she knew he was home. Back outside, the sky had begun to change. A late autumn wind rushed down Foley Square, scattering yellow leaves across the courthouse steps. Reporters circled. Flashes went off. But Michael wasn't looking at cameras. He was looking at the little girl beside him, now walking hand in hand with Agent Keller. smiling, not like someone who had just won a legal war, but like someone who had chosen her own life. Sarah stepped beside Michael. "She saved you," she whispered. Michael nodded. "No, she saved all of us." That night, back at the Carter estate, Michael stood once more in his father's study. The safe was open now, the records sealed, the fight far from over. But in his hand, he held a frame, a photograph of William Carter, 20 years younger, standing with a woman and a small girl who looked eerily like Nora. Beneath the photo, in cursive, "Legacy is not what you leave, it's what you live." Michael turned toward the doorway. Nora was there, holding 2 mugs of cocoa. "You okay?" she asked. He smiled. "I am now." They clinked mugs. Family. Not by blood, but by choice. The sky over Tarrytown was the color of forgiveness. It had rained the night before, a soft, steady hush that washed the city clean, like someone had opened the windows of heaven and let it breathe. Morning sunlight streamed through the old trees outside the Carter estate, warming the brick paths and the ivy-covered walls with the quiet ease of spring's return. Inside, the house had changed, not in furniture, in feel. The silence was no longer heavy. It was patient, soft, the kind of quiet that waited for laughter, not sorrow. And for the first time in years, Michael Carter came down the stairs, not as a CEO, not as a defendant, not as a lost son, but as a father. In the kitchen, the smell of pancakes and maple syrup mingled with the cheerful static of a morning radio. Nora stood at the stove in oversized socks and a Carter family law hoodie that swallowed her whole. She was flipping pancakes with the seriousness of a surgeon. "2 more minutes," she said without looking. Michael smiled. "Do I need to file a breakfast motion?" She squinted at him. "Only if you plan on objecting to burnt edges." He laughed, and it felt good. Unarmored. William Carter shuffled in slowly from the hallway, still recovering but sharper every day. He leaned on his cane with dignity, the scars of his ordeal fading into faint reminders, not burdens. He looked around the kitchen. "This house hasn't smelled like home in a long time," he said softly. "Then today's the first day of the rest of it," Michael replied. Later that morning, they gathered in the sunroom. 3 mugs of cocoa, 1 chessboard, and a new addition, framed above the fireplace, was a photo taken during the trial. The one where Nora stood in front of the courtroom mic, fierce and small and unshakable. Beneath it, she spoke truth when adults stayed silent. Nora stared at it. "You sure it's not too dramatic?" Michael shook his head. "It's perfect." William added, "It's not just your picture. It's your place in this house." She tilted her head. "So I'm officially—" He nodded. "Family. Chosen. Permanent." He handed her a paper. It wasn't a custody document. It was an adoption certificate. Her name, Nora Blake Carter, was written in black ink. She stared at it, then at them. Then she smiled. Not wide, not loud, but with her whole soul. That afternoon they drove into town. It was the first time they had all gone out together. Not to court or meetings or depositions, but to live. They stopped by a bookstore. Nora picked out a collection of Supreme Court oral arguments and a mystery novel. Michael found her reading both at once in the cafe. Multitasking again? He asked. I'm learning how to expose villains and bake lemon pie at the same time. He laughed. That's my girl. They passed through the farmer's market, where Michael ran into an old intern from Lux Tech. I heard you resigned, the young man said, surprised. I didn't resign, Michael replied. I stepped aside. Why? Michael looked back at Nora, who was helping an elderly woman carry a bag of oranges to her car. Because power doesn't mean anything if it's not protecting the right people. That evening, the three of them returned home. A new plaque had been installed on the gate. Welcome home, the Blake Carter family estate. The sun dipped low, golden and forgiving. In the backyard, Nora lay on a blanket, staring up at the sky. Michael sat beside her, watching the wind move through the trees. Do you miss the old life? She asked. The boardrooms, the meetings, the title? He shook his head. I used to think legacy was about control. Now I know. It's about connection. He looked at her. You're my legacy, Nora. You and everything we build next. She reached for his hand. For a long while they just sat, not as millionaire and orphan, not as guardian and ward, but as something much simpler, something earned. Family. Weeks passed. Nora's project, the Justice Lab, launched its first online program for foster kids learning legal rights. Sarah Whitman helped secure federal grants. Agent Keller donated the entire investigative software system to Nora's cause. The world kept moving. But their home, their little corner of it, became a place of rest, of rebuilding, of truth. One evening, Michael stood at the window watching Nora ride her bike down the long driveway. She turned at the last second and waved, not in desperation, not to be noticed, just because she knew he was watching, and he always would be. He whispered aloud, to no one and everyone, "We're home." And this time, he knew what that meant. Not a roof, not even safety, but being seen and loved anyway.